This is the Hyte Y70. It's a case so popular that GameMax literally copied and pasted its marketing language when they made the hype. The Y70 is pretty interesting for a few reasons though. One, it maintains a lot of the higher build quality features that we saw on the Y60, but also it's got some of the, I think, better cable management options on the market for a case. It's got these massive shaped rubber grommets to provide a clean pass-through into the secondary chamber in this dual chamber design. And generally speaking, on the Y70, like with the Y60, there's this really fine attention to detail, and in some ways kind of almost a snobby attention to design, where you have this sort of flowing geometry from one panel to the next, and Hyte spares no expense in bringing it to you. And by Hyte spares no expense, I mean you spare no expense, because it's $220. It doesn't have any fans. And that one's like over $300. Now what do you get for $220 if not fans? You get Hyte logo, Hyte logo, Hyte logo, Hyte logo, Hyte logo, and implied Hyte logo, Hyte logo. And there's another one down there. But wait, there's more. Hyte logo. But Hyte's done pretty well. They burst onto the market for ATX cases with this one, which is the Y60. And the biggest change is that this case shipped with 3 PCIe slots for the vertical GPU mount. And that's because this case was getting designed before the RTX 40 series 4-slot cards were even announced. So Hyte got kind of sideswiped by that one. And later they came out with this, the Y70 with 4 slots. That should have a pretty big impact on GPU thermals because it gets the cards that are thicker away from the glass. If you had a 2-slot card, you're probably not going to see a huge difference, but those don't exist anymore. Technically though, this case came out before the Y70 Non-Touch that we're reviewing today. This is the Y70 Touch version. The Y70 Touch is $360. And it was so wildly popular, which we never would have expected a $360 case to be this popular, that Hyte depleted the LCD supply for this case. Like, they ran out of panels. Like, they couldn't fill market demand. And in the meantime, they made this version to tide everyone over. And with the advent of a $360 case that costs the same as a CPU that comes out of a $20 billion fab, it's now clear that the industry with its mainstream growth is moving looks focused in a lot of ways. We're still function first here. That's how we're going to be reviewing the Y70 Non-Touch today, but we can still talk about some of the looks aspect as well. We've had a mixed history with Hyte. Its parent company is iYPower. So, oh, that sounds good. Wow, that's crazy. What is it? Assembled from tested components, complete system not tested. No, you don't say. But that's why it's so much more impressive that Hyte doesn't suck. Hyte has made it exceptionally clear that it's an entirely different entity from iYPower. It has their money, but our first review of a Hyte product was concluded with the phrase, "We don't hate it," which for us is actually pretty good. That was the Revolt 3 case. It wasn't particularly noteworthy, and it felt like a remnant of parent company iYPower before the reins were handed off. Next, we liked the Y60 and thought it was a creative take on a dual-chamber design. It meaningfully deviated from the trend of O11-like cases, despite middling thermal performance. Then we reviewed the Y40, and we felt like Hyte had removed all of the best parts of the Y60 while also making the thermals worse, leaving us with a disappointing follow-up. We had absolutely no reason to recommend the Y40 and favored its many competitors over that case instead. The Hyte Y70 Touch launched last year in the midst of our case review hiatus, and the no-screen Y70 is relatively new. It's a scaled-up version of the Y60 with the same signature chopped-off corner and shrouded riser cable. The Touch has the addition of an 1100 by 3840 touchscreen, which Hyte misleadingly describes as 4K, despite being almost literally half of the pixel count of 4K. It is nowhere close to 4K, so not a great start from a marketing perspective, but we're working on the Y70 Non-Touch for this review. Let's get into the actual build quality though. Overall, on the Y70, just like with the Y60, except in some ways maybe some more, the build quality is generally exceptional. This is something that Hyte does well with, and they need to at the price point they're hitting, because they have a lot of competitors in that $180 to $220 range. So the build quality has to be good, and fortunately for them, it is. It's one of the things that they did well with the Y60, and that carries over here. So for example, things like getting the panel cornering as flush as reasonably possible to get a more refined look. That's something that's overlooked on cheaper cases or by designers who have less experience in the industry, where you'll get wider gaps, almost like a Tesla or something like that. I should stay in my lane. That was not an intentional car pun. But some other areas that carried over from the Y60 are things like the actual riser. Oh, this one has screws, right. That is a difference we're gonna get to. Hang on, give me 1 second. Damn it. Okay, it's not captive. Like the riser shroud, that's carried over as well. But again, the biggest change is the PCIe slot compatibility. We're now up to 4 slots. It's gonna be a big impact on thermals in general. The case also, though, because it doesn't ship with fans, means we need to be more creative with our configurations in the thermal section later. So options include this massive cavernous side mount where it's so much space over here that realistically, you're not gonna be using any of it. You might use some of it with a video card sticking out this way, but you still have all that depth. And because there's so much space in here, Hyte had to create a reason to use it. So they made the thick Q60, which is more or less only intended to be compatible with these cases. It's over 80 millimeters of fan and radiator. But this isn't something we're really talking about today. It's just something you should be aware of if you want to actually make use of a space this well, the panel's not in there, but it's pretty large. The Y70 takes a very guided build approach. There's not a ton of different ways to build this. You can obviously customize things like water cooling, but ultimately it's intended to be used with a vertical GPU. Horizontal GPUs could be supported if Hyte went the route of others and added a rotating bracket, like say the Fractal Design Flex 2, that'd maybe add cost, and so that might be why they're not doing it, or it's just because they really want you to build it this way. Other large dual chamber cases to consider today would be the Lian 011 Dynamic family, the Corsair 6500s that have just come out. We're working on a review for those now. The Antec King 95 and the King 95 Pro, and something like the Antec C8, all of which have at least one fanless variant alongside their versions with fans, whereas the Y70 is only fanless. This is a $220 case though, and Hyte has established a precedent by selling the $180 Y60, originally at $200, with 3 fans included. So it's in fierce competition with some serious contenders, including itself, at the $180 to $200 mark for alternatives, and they include fans. As a dual chamber case, the Y70 has plenty of room behind the motherboard tray for cable management, but it's not an appreciable increase in space over the Y60. The extra size is more noticeable in the main chamber of the case, where it enables the extra vertical GPU slot as well as more accessible cable cutouts below the motherboard. The cutouts are larger and they're completely out of the way of the bottom fan mounts, which is nice. The extra space also makes it easier to reach the front I/O cables, which are trapped in an inaccessible corner of the Y60. This is a small but important quality of life improvement. Hyte has several Velcro straps pre-installed in the Y70, aiding what we think is overall impressive cable management and routing. The Y70 claims to support eATX boards, but like the Y60 before it, this really just means that there are no hard obstacles to putting a so-called eATX board in the case, like SSI EEB or something. The motherboard tray is sized for ATX boards with ATX standoffs, and anything beyond ATX will overhang. So it's a bit of a stretch to say it's compatible. The tray is bordered by elaborately molded single rubber pieces that cover all of the cable cutouts on the top and front edges of the board, and the rubber is perfectly sized to outline an ATX board. The attention to detail on this piece though is great, as long as it doesn't sag or discolor with age. In terms of fit and finish, the side panels really come into play here. So the side panels socket into place and then just snap in, and it's a pretty good snap. One of the bigger differences though between these and the way that the Y60 was done is, as you saw earlier, these do not have thumb screws or any kind of retaining screw to hold them in place. So while it is a nice and pretty sturdy pop into place, If in transit, there's nothing to hold it down. We like to have that option of a screw to hold things in place, just in case you happen to move the computer for one reason or another. The bottom fan mount for the Y70 is definitely an improvement, for the most part, with a fan tray that's removable from the exterior of the case, and it can use standard fan screws rather than special radiator screws that are included with the Y60. You have to make sure the screw heads are flat though, or they'll bend the bottom filter. Another change from the Y70, where we think Hyte was actually listening to our review, is the filter on the bottom. So this filter that is in the GPU area, its intake, basically, is much less obstructive than the old filter was. Let's take a look at that as well. So if we pull this one out, you can see the amount of plastic here on the older design is a significant percentage of the total porosity of the filter in the bottom. This one, it still needs that plastic for, although they're being a bit artsy with the layout of it, it is needed for retaining that fine mesh so it doesn't either get sucked in or sag down with time from those fans being nearby. So this is a big improvement actually, because this filter on the old one, even though it might not look like a huge difference, we're talking, I don't know, just eyeballing it, looks like maybe a 50% difference in the porosity. That's going to have a big impact on GPU thermals. So they're listening. The mount is still fully enclosed on both sides, but even though that's not ideal for airflow, it effectively hides the bottom fans and it protects them from any loose wires. As for water cooling, the bottom mount can't be used for radiators. Both the side and the top mounts are officially compatible with 360mm radiators at most. The top fan tray is removable with plastic springs that hold it in place firmly. There's a generous clearance on both the top and the side mounts as well. The side mount has basically unlimited clearance depending on the GPU length, or up to 125mm according to Hyte, if the GPU overlaps with the radiator area, which is enough for like 1.5 thick Q60s if you glued them together or something. It's also a more conservative estimate than the Y60 got, even though this dimension hasn't changed significantly. The top mount can fit radiators up to 68mm thick, assuming standard 25mm thick fans as well. 3.5-inch drive support is kind of going the way of 5.25-inch support in some ways, where these cases, despite how large they are, they only have 2 official sleds. Now, Hyte, to their credit, does some nice touches on them, where it's a nicer quality metal sled. It's got their stamping and logo on it. I think we counted those in the intro. Yeah, we did. And the downside, though, no vibration damping. These might make more sense as solid-state drive storage, or you might want to put a small strip of foam in there if you have a drive that makes some rattling noise. So alternatively, it can fit 2 2.5-inch drives in each for a total of 4. They've definitely applied the small detail, and it's true that the Y70 is geared towards showy builds that are less likely to use SATA drives, but the Y70 is an XL variant of the Y60, and it'd be appropriate to use some of that extra space for storage, or literally anything, because it's pretty empty right now. We had a similar criticism of the North XL versus the North. So companies are still making big cases, but it feels like they're forgetting why we ever made them to begin with. And now we're gonna get into testing. This is using new methodology. So our Fractal North and our GameMax Hype reviews were a pilot of our new testing methodology we've been working on, and now we've finalized it. We've changed a few things, including the GPU itself. We'll talk about that in the methodology piece. So the data is not comparable to the recent North review, but we've rerun everything through it, and you'll see pretty much all the same cases in here as we get through this round of testing. And this is going to be the final configuration for our heat load going forward, because we basically increased it a little bit to increase the intensity on the cases when we're running the benchmarks. Now, the Y70, because it doesn't include any stock fans, we had to include some with it. And our approach historically to this has been to use our standardized set of fans for cases that don't include fans. And the standardized fan testing configuration was something that was requested by you all in our audience many years ago at this point. We have a whole separate methodology video that deep dives on that, including some of the shortcomings of the methodology and some of the high points of it. We'll link that below. We'll start with noise-normalized testing. All case fans are dropped in tandem to reach our target of 27 dBA at 1 meter and a noise floor of 13.6 dBA. This puts all cases on an even playing field and balances out the advantages of cases that pack in as many fans as loudly as possible. The Y70's noise-normalized CPU cooling performance is weak, partially due to the pressure loss at the panels. That plastic is necessary as reinforcement for the mesh with the way that Hyte designed these, but it also impedes the flow. The bottom intake configuration was already quieter, so it didn't require dropping fan speeds as much to reach the target, but the lack of direct flow to the CPU cooler put the average core temperature at 51 degrees Celsius over ambient and the P cores at 55. Side intake fared better at 49 degrees all-core and 53 degrees P-core, and the Torrent tops the chart at 42 degrees all-core and 46 P-core, which is actually really impressive and establishes it once again as a best-in-class for target performance. This is now over multiple test benches, so the Torrent's doing well. Lian Li's O11 Dynamic Evo XL is directly comparable since it was tested with the same fans and like-for-like spots. The O11D Evo XL ran at 47 degrees for the P-core average, making it 6 degrees cooler than the Y70 with side intake because the O11 XL is guiding airflow better. Antec C8 tied the Y70's bottom intake CPU thermals, which makes sense given the C8's bottom intake stock configuration, although it does have different fans at 160mm. The C8 is worth paying attention to in the GPU thermal section, especially because of this. The Montec King 95 Pro improved about 3 degrees over the Y70 with side intake. That's better, but not as much better as the 6 stock fans might lead you to expect. It's the value of noise normalizing. Finally, the Y60's average was worse than either of the Y70's tested configurations at 53 all-core and 57 P-core. The Y60 ships with stock fans and a bottom intake configuration, which puts it at a disadvantage for CPU thermals. This chart is for GPU thermals at full speed with noise levels next to each entry name. It's an interesting crossroads of thermals and noise, where we can talk about the sort of noise or cooling efficiency. Fractal's Torrent is the best here for thermals at 39 degrees GPU temperature and 42.3 dBA for noise. The Y70, though, with side intake and our standard fans, is better from a noise efficiency standpoint. It's 2 degrees warmer at 41 degrees Celsius over ambient, but it's also 4 dBA quieter. That's a noticeable drop in noise for what's likely an unnoticeable change in thermals. But remember, these are fans we chose because the Y70 doesn't include any. The Antec C8 is better still, down at 37.1 dBA with its own fans, and the same thermals as the Y70. This is a good showing for Antec's more serious efforts in the case market this past year, and maybe we'll do a standalone review for this one after seeing this. The Y70 with bottom intake is significantly quieter than the side intake configuration, dropping about 4 dBA but also climbing for thermals. The noise reduction is due to a combination of the greater distance of the backmost fan and the loss of the side slat impact to acoustics. Interestingly, the O11D Evo XL is also about 34 dBA, but with a side intake configuration. The thermals are the same, so this and the Y70 with bottom intake have equal noise and thermals in this test. The Y60 was the quietest we've tested for this benchmark thus far. That'll change with time, and it follows that it was also the warmest on the chart. On this chart, the same standardized set of 3 Noctua fans at two 140s and one 120 is used in each case, and at max speed rather than noise normalized. That's why the O11D Evo XL and the Y70 results are different from the first chart, despite using the same fans. The O11D Evo XL still beats the Y70, now by 2 to 3 degrees for side intake. With the same fans and the same bottom intake configuration, the Y70 and Y60 tied at 48 degrees Celsius above ambient for the average all-core CPU temperature and about 52 for P-core. Those are the warmest CPU results on this chart, tied with the Antec C8 with the same bottom intake configuration. This all makes sense. Forcing air past the GPU is not an effective way to cool a CPU. The Y60's bottom filter is more restrictive as well, but this should become more of a factor with GPU thermals in a bit. And here are the GPU thermals when noise normalized. The Hyte Y70 is more competitive when sorting by average GPU temperature. The Torrent establishes the best performance again, this time at 40 degrees Celsius over ambient for the average GPU temperature. It's actually a great result. The Y70 with a side intake configuration averaged 48 degrees, which is a huge loss in performance versus the Torrent. It's a big range to establish here. The bottom intake configuration with fans pointed directly into the GPU averaged 45, putting it in the middle of the chart. The O11D Evo XL's average GPU temperatures with side intake are effectively tied with the Y70 bottom intake, so when taken together with the Evo XL's better CPU temperatures, the Lian Li case wins. The Antec C8 does extremely well here thanks to its aggressive focus on GPU cooling and its large fans in the bottom, landing at 42 degrees average. This is an excellent performance from Antec and borders on the Torrent, so where it's weak in CPU, it's strong in GPU. The Y60 had the worst GPU thermals out of the limited set of data we've recorded so far, but it's not awful. The GPU isn't in throttling territory and still has plenty of room to breathe. It's just the objective worst on this chart. We'll use the standardized fan chart again for a more direct comparison with the Y70. Moving to the full standardized fan chart, the Y70 side intake configuration is actually better than bottom intake for GPU thermals. The side intake was also louder, as we saw previously, so for the previous noise-normalized chart, fan speeds were reduced more for the side intake as a result. On this chart, the standardized fans are set to 100%, which benefits the side intake configuration. This result is the best on the chart, but standardizing the fans is a test our viewers requested, and we have a whole video detailing why it's a naturally flawed configuration. We run it due to popular demand, though, as long as everyone's aware of the limitations of testing. One of the reasons it is flawed, though, is that we're removing fans that are naturally better and included in order to somewhat arbitrarily standardize. The Torrent has its excellent 180mm fans removed for this. Regardless, it's a story we've told a lot now, but it's a test people want. With enough airflow directed along the right path, the Y70 can hold its own, although the mesh-fronted cases have better overall performance when taking CPU thermals into account. The Y60 was at the bottom of the chart here, but still acceptable for GPU thermals. Both of the Y-series cases have multiple layers of material around the bottom fan slots, and the Y60's bottom filter in particular is closed off. Removing the bottom filter proves this, where we reduced the temperature by 3 degrees on the GPU. That's huge for just removing a filter. So it shows where Hyte has learned a little bit with the Y70. For something different, here's the VRM and RAM sensor thermals when noise normalized. The VRM temperature in the Y70 averaged 35 degrees Celsius above ambient with bottom intake and 36 with side, so they're the same. It's not much better than the Y60, which is currently the worst entry on the chart at 37 degrees. Hyte's competition did better with the O11D Evo XL at 30 degrees and the Kin 95 Pro at 31. For comparison, the Fractal North is the current performance leader at 28 degrees for the XL variant. There are 2 SPD hub sensors in our test bench, one for each stick of DRAM. The one we're averaging here is tucked underneath the CPU cooler, sheltered from direct airflow. The Hyte Y70 and Y60 are both still on the warm end of the chart here, with a best case average of 27 degrees for the Y70 with bottom intake. This is one instance where the Kin 95 Pro's pile of fans helped with an average of 21 degrees, while the O11D Evo XL only slightly beat the Y70 at 25 degrees. One quick bonus set of data from our hemi-anechoic chamber, we noted an on and off quiet humming noise with the Y70 side intake configuration that pushed the average noise level up, sometimes. We think because of the closely spaced slats in the Y70 side panel, this noise occasionally came up. Here's what it sounds like. Normally we'd make a chart for a single point in time, but showing the frequency plot in nearly real time helps to better illustrate that oscillating whirring we're hearing under some conditions. This is with the fan speeds reduced, and as a result, it's not particularly loud, but it seems to happen because of a blade passing frequency over the slats. Overall, this is highly dependent on the fans you use, but it's just another reminder that the slat or hole design in the panels can really affect the noise behavior. So the Y70's biggest direct competition is the Y60, just in terms of things that are basically the same, but are cheaper. And at $220, the Y70 Non-Touch is a very expensive case. It's not unheard of for a case of this level of attention to detail, build quality, because the build quality is excellent, to be fair to the price. But it has some really serious competition. So once again, things like the Lian O11 series, the Antec C8, the Corsair 6500 series, that's basically brand new. We have a separate review on that coming up. Or if you're okay with going non-dual chamber, something like the Fractal Torrent remains a best-in-class case that's heavily focused on function. So that's more your style. That case, despite being a few years old now, remains at the top of all the charts, even with our new approach to testing methodology, with new components and larger GPUs, with flow-through designs. So it's managed to age pretty well. And of course, something like the Fractal North cases, XL or non-XL, if you want that wood aesthetic. But in terms of dual chamber designs, just sticking there, a lot of them end up in that $160 to $220 range, probably around 180 is where the fiercest competition is. So that's where Hyte has to battle the hardest. Now, in terms of the touch, it really doesn't compete in the same class because it's $360. The Hyte Y60 over here on its side is a case where Hyte first started experimenting with a screen for this corner, where they sold a separate screen and you had to 3D print your own mount for it. So that made it interesting and kind of cool, actually, but also way less accessible for a lot of people who aren't willing to do that or don't have access to a 3D printer. So that was a bit of an anomaly. But they applied that design to this, the Y70 Touch, and the cost went up as a result because it's a different case and it's a more refined approach. So the Y60 LCD kit plus the Y60 would cost about $330. The situations in which a Y70 Non-Touch makes more sense than a Y60 are pretty specific. You'd want to have a thicker GPU, or you'd have cooling hardware that won't fit in the Y60. Or Hyte paints your favorite VTuber anime character on the side of the Y70. Hyte has pitched the Y70 as a stopgap, with the option to buy a Touch upgrade kit later. But we can't recommend doing that just because you either buy something that exists in full now or wait for the Y70 Touch to restock, just because we don't know when you're going to be able to buy those upgrade kits. And we've learned in this industry not to recommend waiting for promises. Now, all of the Y series cases compete based on appearance rather than performance, but that isn't necessarily a problem. The Y60 and the Y70 Touch have both been extremely popular, despite costing more than better cooled cases. The triple tempered glass panels in the Y70 are best suited to a flashy liquid cooled system, which would make up for some of the thermal shortcomings and basically render them irrelevant anyway. If you do need performance, the Lian O11D Evo XL fits into the same product category with potentially better airflow, larger radiator capacity, and an invertible motherboard tray. While the Antec K95 Pro and Antec C8 ARGB are both significantly cheaper and include a full set of case fans. But the Y70 is excellent build quality. The cable management's good. It's just that in terms of that value, it's not fighting on value, it doesn't seem like. So if you're more value-oriented or cost-sensitive, there's a lot of cheaper options that might serve you better and save some of that money for something maybe more important for your build, like a better GPU. Meanwhile, if you really just care about function only, or you want a high build quality and function, there's a lot of better options on the airflow side, like the Torrent, as probably the best example of that. So for the Y70, it ends up kind of in the middle for us, where we really like the build quality. It's just that the price isn't there. It really feels like this should be cheaper by at least $20. Honestly, it feels more appropriate at like 180 because of the lack of fans, where although yes, you can buy your own fans, there are other cases that are cheaper that also don't have fans, and you could buy them there too. So that's kind of where we're a little split on it. It's a good case. It's just they're selling that luxury brand experience. So that's what you'd be getting with the Y70, but at least they improved overall on the Y60. So that's a good thing, and it's important to see that progress for a company that's relatively new to case design, and so far they have an overall good track record with the Y60 now improving for GPU performance. So that's it for this one. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more. You'll see a lot of case reviews coming up because it's all finalized now. And actually, we have probably a standalone C8 review coming out, and we have a couple others we're working on too, like the 6500. So check back for all that, and go to store.gamersnexus.net to support us directly. We'll see you all next time.